Hello, everyone. My name is Jenna Weiss, and I'm the Assistant Director of Public Programs at the Jewish Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation featuring artists Hadar Gad, Dor Guez, and Lisa Oppenheim, moderated by Darsie Alexander. This talk is presented in conjunction with the exhibition Afterlives, Recovering the Lost Stories of Looted Art, on view at the Jewish Museum through January 9th, 2022, and we encourage you to visit if you are able to do so. Now I would like to briefly introduce our speakers. Hadar Gad is a painter whose work has been exhibited at museums and galleries across Israel, Europe, and the United States. She currently serves as head of the art department of the Jewish Arab campus of Givat Haviva and as a lecturer at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. Gad is a recipient of the Israeli Minister of Culture Award 2016 and has received past scholarships of excellence from the Israeli Ministry of Education. Dor Guez's photography, video installations, essays, and lecture performances explore the relationship between narrative, trauma, memory, and displacement. His focus is on archival materials and photographic practices of the Middle East and North Africa. He received his PhD from Tel Aviv University and is a professor at the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design. In addition, he's the founder of the Christian Palestinian Archive and co-director of Seaport Mediterranean Curatorial Residency. Using various means, including but not limited to photography, Lisa Oppenheim draws upon libraries, collections, and online repositories that become a point of departure for her layered work. Oppenheim has had solo exhibitions at Kunstverein Hamburg and the Museum of Contemporary Art Cleveland, among others. Her work is held in the collections of numerous museums nationally and internationally, and in 2014, she was the recipient of the AIMIA Ago Photography Prize from the Art Gallery of Ontario and the Spielman International Photography Prize from the Israel Museum. She is represented by Tanya Banakdar Gallery in New York and Los Angeles, and by The Approach in London. Lastly, Darsie Alexander is the Susan and Elihu Rose Chief Curator at the Jewish Museum and a curator of Afterlives, Recovering the Lost Stories of Looted Art. She has held previous positions at the Walker Art Center, Baltimore Museum of Art, Museum of Modern Art, and the Katona Museum of Art. Alexander has curated numerous exhibitions focusing on post-war American and European art. It is my pleasure to welcome Darsie Alexander to begin this conversation.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Darsie Alexander, the Chief Curator at the Jewish Museum and the co-organizer of Afterlives, The Lost Stories of Looted Art, which is up on view in the fall of 2021. I am joined here by 3 out of the 4 artists who have participated with newly commissioned works for the exhibition, in large part because we felt that the themes of restitution and recovery and reclamation are so important in our culture today. And that as curators of the exhibition, the stories that are associated with Holocaust era or World War II era looting also provide an opportunity to make links to other forms of cultural plunder today, other issues that that artists and you all at the table with me this morning have been delving into thoroughly and with really an incredible sense of curiosity about this subject and its history. So I'm going to start off by thanking you for your participation this morning. I'm going to do a very quick overview of the exhibition just by looking at some installation shots and talking about the thesis a little bit, and then turn it over to you for each of you to talk a bit about your work. And then the last portion, we're going to focus on just having a conversation about some of the issues that that have come up in the course of making the exhibition and actually since it's opened. So here we go. So we're just looking now at the first gallery of this exhibition, Afterlives, Recovering the Lost Stories of Looted Art. And as you can see, you're looking at 2 works that would have been considered degenerate art, which of course is the narrative that many people associate with World War II era looting. But we actually wanted to do something quite different, which was to really focus on the themes of dispossession and displacement, and in particular, the trafficking of artworks, both as part of the looting process, but more importantly, as part of the recovery effort. So it was very essential to me and to my co-curator for the exhibition, Sam Sakharov, to have the word recovery in the title, because that's really where we wanted to place our emphasis. The first gallery is filled with what would be considered sort of our modern master's space, and it is associated with the work of the ERR, which was the Nazi art looting task force. And the image that you see in the photo blow up in the corner of the gallery is actually an installation shot, if you will, taken during the early 1940s of the Jeu de Paume, which was the storage depot for many of the works in particular that were seized out of Jewish collections in Paris, Paris and French collections being among the most targeted and prized for the Nazis. And we really saw the exhibition as an opportunity to bring together works that really hadn't seen each other and hung in the same space for many, many decades. So several of the objects that you see in the right-hand photo blow up, if you will, are actually in the galleries themselves. The next space, or on the opposite side of the wall, is this is a Claude Lorraine. We wanted to also talk about, you know, what not only what were the objects that were looted to be sold, to be destroyed, to be labeled as degenerate, but also what were the objects that were looted because they were prized items. And this is a Claude Lorraine painting that was seized by one of Hitler's right-hand, men in the Reich as a work that would be destined for the so-called Führer Museum. There was a museum that was being set up in Austria of all the right work, the sort of more neoclassical work that was favored by the Nazis as representing a kind of new Germany. Through the wall, you see these faces. Those are pictures by August Zonder. And they signal to the viewer, too, how important photography is in a driving force of the exhibition, and also just the essential quality of seeing people in the show, that this is not just a story of masterworks and dramatic events and discoveries, but that these histories hinge on a persecuted people, and that was very important to keep top of mind. And then before I turn it over to Hadar, who's going to be our first person to go, I wanted to mention very quickly the fact that the Jewish Museum was the right place to do this exhibition, not only because we're the Jewish Museum and these are stories that we tell, but also the Jewish Museum was involved in the recovery effort through our work with the Jewish Cultural Reconstruction, which was an organization that was very involved in identifying and ultimately saving and extracting from Europe ceremonial objects and Judaica out of personal family collections and synagogues that were destroyed. Many of these objects were labeled airless for exactly that reason, because the families and communities from whence they came were decimated. And the museum really participated in an effort to preserve these cherished items and then to redistribute them out to other Jewish communities throughout the United States and elsewhere. On the right-hand corner of the slide, you see a case that is a series of books that were also saved as part of the efforts of the JCR, but this is not part of our history. It's actually an installation by Maria Eichhorn, who was not able to join us today, but I will pivot quickly to say a few words about her work, because it's part of the constellation of artistic contributions that were made for this show. And Maria's work often deals with intellectual histories in particular, and the role of books and volumes in extending knowledge from generation to generation. And this is an installation shot of a piece that she did at Documenta a number of years ago. Part of this story is so much about the books and the intellectual history. Books were looted, seized, burned, destroyed as a major first step in the pillaging process. And Maria really delves into that history in her work, which also focuses on the efforts, and this is an installation shot of some of the works from the JCR, from the Jewish Cultural Reconstruction, again, objects that had been saved from destruction and are now in New York collections. And she also wanted to direct in her installation, which comes with a sort of a separate case of objects, including field reports that Hannah Arendt wrote. Hannah Arendt was one of the key figures in working for the JCR in identifying objects that were in peril. She worked with a joint distribution committee. This is really when intellectuals were also acting as activists. And Maria's work and practice often focuses on the work of women in that story. And we often think about the monuments men in this very gendered narrative around looting and recovery process, but she takes a very different angle. So with that, I want to turn to start to hear from our artists today. And I'm going to be driving the slide deck. And I've asked each artist to speak for just a few minutes about their practice, and then we'll open it up to discussion. So Lisa, the installation, which is in the fourth gallery of the show, and could you tell us a little bit about the history here?
Yeah, so I started my research looking at photographs that because the Nazis were took very extensive documentation of the artworks and the objects that they looted. So I sort of started my research looking at some of these photographs. And I was particularly interested in photographs where the artwork no longer existed. So that the photograph isn't just a document of something in the world, it's the only visual record of this artwork having existed. So I was interested in the artwork I focused on in this was a still life painting by a Flemish painter. And one thing that sort of caught my eye when looking at the images online were like, it was like a very imperfect documentation. So there were hot spots on the surface of the painting, so kind of referencing lights that you couldn't see. So there was sort of there were references to an outside world that wasn't visible, and there is something about that I found very evocative. And what I did is I did some research on this particular painting, and I found out it had been stolen from the Pierre Levy family in Paris in 1942, and that it had probably ended up in a castle in what's now the Czech Republic, which was firebombed in the sort of final days of the war. So that presumably is why this painting was not restituted, not recovered. It was probably destroyed in this firebombing. And I was thinking about then sort of my own practice and how I could kind of not, remake this artwork, but sort of give this document taken by the Nazis life as a different artwork. And I was thinking about this process that I've been engaged with over the last 10 years or so, where I have taken images of smoke and exposed them to firelight to create photographic images. And so rather than sort of fire being the agent of destruction, as it was in this particular painting, and kind of in general, it's also a generative process. It's a generative force. And so that's how I thought it would be interesting then to use the images of this painting and expose them via this fire process as the basis of a new artwork. And I was also interested in the location of where this artwork had been stolen from, and the sort of.
I just want to quickly point to, just for clarity, for those that can't see these images perfectly well. But so when you're talking about the painting that the ERR painting of the work that was destroyed in the firebombing, those are the little squares that are kind of floating through these larger cloud-like compositions.
Exactly, exactly. And what those are, because there's no kind of complete painting anymore, I thought it was important to represent the painting only in fragments. So each little section that you see represents a fragment of the original painting. And the size of the overall artwork, the size of each overall photograph corresponds to the size of the original painting that I was able to figure out from the ERR documents that went along with the photograph. And then and since, the Nazis kept such extensive files on each of these artworks, I was able to find the address that it was stolen from. And I put the address, which was 17 Rue Cardanet, into a Google image search and saw the building, and then was just sort of panning on the Google, sorry, not Google image search, on the Google Maps. And I was just started to pan on Google Maps, and I started to just pan up, and there was just these images of the sky. And I found those to be so evocative in some way. And I think a lot about, like, obviously, photography's representational capacity, its indexical quality, but also, of course, the way in which photography is always a marker of time passing, of the time between when the photograph was taken and when it's viewed. And so I started to do little screen captures of these images, and then ended up actually commissioning a photographer in Paris to go to the side of the building and photograph the sky over it. And then I inverted the colors so that there's a kind of confusion if it's clouds, smoke, sort of kind of it occupies a sort of visual ambiguity that I was interested in. And also sort of references in my smoke, in the smoke technique with the fire exposures, there's a solarization that happens. So the positive and the negative values become inverted. So this sort of, these positive and negative relationships sort of are important kind of just in the process of making these.
Lisa, do you want to say something about just the serial nature of the installation that you made here?
Well, I was interested in something that's sort of unfolded over time, because I always think of photography. People think of it, as the Cartier-Bresson spoke of the decisive moment. I was going to say critical moment, but it wasn't. Because of the decisive moment, and I think of photography more as, rather than representing like a particular moment, but representing an unfolding of time. So of all the time it takes to produce the work, to view it, the time it's kept in some Nazi archive and then rediscovered by me. So I think that in this way, I've always thought, and also my own personal training in experimental film, I think about time-based photography as being time-based, and images unfold and their meanings unfold over time. So therefore, I think, creating an installation where one had to sort of walk past it and sort of take it in over time is something that was very important to my thinking about this work.
Great, perfect. So Hadar, I'm going to ask you to just speak for a few minutes on the pieces that you made here.
I made like a visual research through photos and stories from archives. And instead of writing, I'm painting. Usually I'm doing a small painting like for the research. And then some of them demand to be larger. And then I'm make the research deeper.
Why don't you say a little bit about the source material, like these particular pictures that are on the screen right now? Do you want to just talk about maybe the two on the left?
Yeah, the Danzig synagogue, I didn't want to do it. I just looked at these pictures and I said, no, it's not for this exhibition, but something very interesting in the composition, in the light. And I felt that I must do it. And I thought not to send it over. And just after I read about the story that all the part of the staff that were there and the send in August 1939 came to your museum, and I was surprised.
That's right. Just for further clarification, so the painting on the left, which is of a large synagogue, it's based on a historical photograph, is the synagogue in the Jewish community of Danzig that was the repository of a number of the objects that are currently in the Jewish Museum's collection from Danzig. So there's a very direct link back to the Jewish Museum's history when you made this piece. Are there any of these works that you would like to maybe talk about a bit about these drawings on the left, Hadar?
I just looked at the pictures from the archives, and some of them I feel that I need to research them through my hands and to understand the atmosphere, the place, like ecology process, to scratch and peeling the layers to understand what the things that uncovered reality.
Yes, and also the drawings also give just an extraordinary sense about the scale of your effort. So you produced and sent a lot of work that we couldn't actually fit in the exhibition. It was a very hard process of making that final selection on the ground when we were in the galleries, but we hoped these drawings, which are also some of them taken from photographs, do the trick in capturing the depth of your practice. So Dor, I'm just going to advance to you now quickly.
Good evening. So in the past 15 years, I've been working with different archives from North Africa and the Middle East. And I think that in this installation, I'm trying to give a voice to a chapter in Jewish history that is not that well known, which is the occupation of Tunisia by the Nazi in 1943, and a part of Jewish culture that disappeared, and it's I will put it under the title the Judeo-Arabic culture, which was a mix of Hebrew and Arabic cultures into one language. And I'm doing it by telling this very personal story, the story of my grandparents, who had a theater company in Tunisia. My grandfather was a screenwriter, and the first image that we can see here, it's his own handwriting, and he used to write all of his playwrights in Judeo-Arabic, in Ma'alek, they call it. And my grandmother was a costume designer and an actress in the theater. Once the Nazis occupied Tunisia, they burned the majority of the books, a lot of books in Hebrew and in Ma'alek, in Judeo-Arabic. And then later on, when they immigrated to Israel in the early 50s, they put what remains in suitcases in the belly of the boat. And then as a result of water leak, the majority of the playwrights were destroyed. And I saved from this suitcase only one. And when I opened it, I saw how the characters that already mix its own alphabet, the Ma'alek. It's very similar to Yiddish, but Yiddish is written in Hebrew, and Ma'alek has its own alphabet. I saw that there were even more blend together. And it created, because it's like a closed book, when you open them after so many years, it created this mural stains, like Rorschach. Do you say Rorschach? How do you say it, Darsie?
Rorschach.
Rorschach stains. And it was an attempt to give a voice to this culture, but at the same time to tell the story of the book as an object, what happened to it during immigration, I think is a part of the larger narrative. So the installation contains of different sections from this book, focusing on the stains. It's all 4 lines, and they are spread in the gallery. And in front of them, you can see that there are different 7 vitrines with objects. And the name of this installation is The Belly of the Boat. These are objects that came with them from Tunisia and are being displayed in a very, I would say, a museum-like display. And it relates maybe to my larger attempt as an artist to tell, not only to tell stories that are not a part of meta-narratives of any, I don't know, nation or culture, or you can't really find out materials about it in history books, but also to try and doing it by visual means. So they're not necessarily all of them what you put in a museum, but in this context, I think they are important. Like there is the vase of this fish that was very popular in the 50s and was in their house. There is a selection of buttons. Oh, here you can see it, yes. There is a collection of buttons that my grandmother used to collect and mark by colors in different boxes. Parchment paper, my grandmother, as I said, used to do the costumes, and this is from the Burda, the costume that she used to make by German and French magazine, and then from the parchment paper, it goes into fabric. And there is also a section in the installation that relates to her. And for me, it's this image of, or this object of the parchment paper, it's her own handwriting, like you can see on the other side of my grandfather. Yes, and these are objects, these are series of photographs, not scans like the handwriting, it's photographs. It's basically the parchment papers that she kept and brought with her. And the general shape is from magazines, but she drew on them and she added details. And I photographed them on a paper-made light box. It's a dark room. There's only light coming from below the paper. And that's why they're like very warm, more warm in the inside at the center, because there are more layers of the paper. And then it's kind of becoming more abstract at the edges. And this floating like paper on papers obviously relates to this, to their story of immigration and this culture that kind of disappeared. I'm relating it, I was asked to relate it to current projects, so I'm doing so. So I'm relating it to a project that is now showing in Bielefeld in Germany. I work there in an active church. It's a very interesting kunst because people are still going to Sunday preaches and the church is open to the public. And it is site-specific installation, also relating to language. I inserted on the floor of the church, you can see it, the story of Ruth from the Bible all over the floor. It's this is only half of the installation, like the church is going another 25 meters behind me. Oh, here you can see it from above. And the audience comes and remove their shoes when they enter, because this is not a projection, this is actually like cut out letters. And the idea, the name of the show is Foreign Fields, which in Hebrew and Arabic, foreign field, it's when somebody is mixing different culture, or if you're cheating on your spouse, you said you went to foreign fields, Sdot Zarim. And in this context, obviously in Germany, what's happening right now in Germany with all the immigration waves, but also in the church, it was important for me to kind of insert a language that is completely Semitic, that is closer to the Bible than German. Yeah. I tried to do it as short as possible.
No, it's perfect. And thank you for bringing us up to date on how this project connects with your work. So what I might do is just stop sharing for a minute, and then I'll pull slides up as we need to. But I thought just so we can see one another's faces as we continue our dialogue here. So thank you. Thanks to each of you for putting together some thoughts. And I guess so many questions kind of come to mind. And as you were talking, like there were certain recurring themes that that I had anticipated might come out, but then there were some others that I didn't anticipate would come out. And I'm going to start with the ones that I didn't anticipate, because that always makes for more interesting conversation, which is like the sense that and Lisa, you spoke about it when you actually identified the home and you gave the address of the family in Paris that had owned that painting that was eventually destroyed, that formed such an important part of your work. And Dor, you talked about kind of opening up this pages of a book, like, that you opened up and you kind of peeled back these layers of your own family's archive. And Hadar, while you didn't speak to this theme in your presentation, I've heard you talk about your own family's relationship to this history. So I guess my first question, or my first opening foray, is to ask you, and maybe I'll start with you, Lisa, about just that impulse of taking this very big challenge and theme, because we were very open-ended when we invited you, all of you, into the exhibition, of like really zeroing in on a particular family and a particular story. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about where that impulse came from. I'm interested in hearing from all of you, but maybe I'll start from Lisa. Lisa's.
I think that the story really came through the image that I found. And it was like, there was like that, that sometimes there's just like an indescribable something that draws you to a certain image. And through that, I kind of unpacked the history of this painting and, a little bit of this family. So I think it, in some ways, especially with photographs, so much of the time, especially that are related to a family, it comes through a knowledge of the family, and then you sort of go through, find like an image of their stuff or something, and this sort of happened in reverse. It was this sort of document of loss became a way of getting some insight into the history of this painting and the family that owned it.
And you're also getting to something that I know is important to Dor too, which is like this idea that images and family histories are often told by way of the photographic relic.
Yeah.
So Dor, what are some of your thoughts on this?
I always think of myself as like a storyteller, even though I'm dealing with art and there is not necessarily a narrative, especially not in a show that with a show that doesn't contain a video piece, but a storyteller in a visual way. And
the next one, we'll do the next one.
But the storyteller, a story can be told also by objects and still images. And I think it's very hard, like obviously the show deals with the Holocaust. It's very hard for us to understand something that is so massive, that is like we can't understand it in human with our brain. Like it's really hard to grasp, but it's much more accessible through personal stories. And I think that as personal you get in general, you tell a bigger story and you relate to a larger narrative. I'm focusing in the show on my grandparents' story, but I don't really think it's just about them. It's about the culture that is being that disappeared. It's about the chapter in Jewish history, as I mentioned, that nobody really knows a lot about. And photography, in a way, I think is as a medium, and that's also maybe relates to the installation, is equivalent to print or to the how do you say, to invent something, inventation of the print. Can I say that?
Sure.
I mean, the inventation of the print that was all of a sudden
Invention?
not,
You're talking about the invention?
invention, yes,
The
invention.
invention, right, right.
So photography relates to print because the invention of print makes like knowledge being more accessible to a lot of people, and that's what also the Nazis, as we know, tried to kind of to narrow by burning books. And photography, in a way, is like it's a revolution by itself, by making like images and knowledge, visual knowledge, spread in such a large to a larger audience. And we see the result of it, obviously, how it evolved today. We know that it's also manipulated, being a tool for manipulation and propaganda, but at the same time, there is knowledge there, visual knowledge. And I think of that, I can see like really like an equivalent between print and photography. That makes sense? What do you think?
Yeah, it does. And I want to get back to photography in just a minute, because that is obviously such a strong through line. But before I do, Hadar, do you have anything to say about sort of this this impulse that maybe I'm projecting back onto all of you, but it does really strike me that each one of you kind of connected back in some very personal way or a very specific way, either through a family or understanding and researching a family or a home. How did that approach work for you, or how does this story and commission connect with you on that level?
I think to born and grow up in Israel and raised in Israel, all the picture that I found after it, when you send me or when I get into the archives and I saw the photo there, I felt that I saw them. Because all the Holocaust and the images from the Holocaust, we are growing up here with them like it's in our DNA, visual DNA. And my grandparents came to Israel before the Holocaust, but I saw pictures of the family. I heard stories, very little stories because they didn't want to talk about it. But we grew up here, like when the Holocaust and the visual images, they are part of our visual DNA. And when I saw the pictures, I felt that I saw them already. Maybe I was there, and I wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think just as the organizer of the show, one of the things that we felt was really important is, I mean, I'm sure you've all had the experience of, as we did, researching just the scale of the looting, which was vigorously documented, both on the Nazi side and on the Allies side. The Allies, when they went in after the war, made these very comprehensive photo albums. One even had the bold title of a history of photography. And it really relates to history of photography of the recovery effort, but just looking into these spaces where millions of volumes of books, hundreds of artworks stacked in rows, massive piles of furniture. I mean, it's both through the images that you can begin to understand the scale, but I think that goes to what Dor, you were saying earlier, like, you know, how do you even understand this history? And moreover, like, how do you make a little, 5,000 square foot exhibition that just takes a little slice of that? Was an incredible challenge, but obviously photography played a huge role. And I want to get into that a little bit. Lisa, you talked about in your work kind of this, I loved what you said, that a photograph both gives you a moment to, that a photograph exists across many different moments, the moment of inception and the moment when the image is received. And you have put forward an image of something that no longer exists, that were it not for you would not be received by anyone. And I think that's true. And in the case of Dor, your work, and to a different extent, because you've also used photographs, Hadar, your work. So I'm wondering, since Lisa, you started so eloquently on talking about the role that photography has in documenting time, and in particular archival photographs and the archival image, and where that is a starting point for your work. You actually use your own family's archive. And I mean, archival photographs are throughout the exhibition and were part of all of your projects in different ways. But
Yeah.
you in particular are always going back into your family's archive. And I'm wondering how, yeah.
And you were wondering how?
No, I'm just wondering, when you got the invitation to participate in this exhibition, you seemed to know right away that this was kind of what you wanted to do. So I'm wondering if you can like rewind a little bit and talk about the process of what you wanted to do for this installation vis-a-vis your family archive.
So you think I knew right away? That's interesting.
Well, you seem to like,
yeah.
there was a moment when you were like, this is what it was so clear.
Well, you sent me this. You sent me, I think it was 300 pages that you sent, and I was overwhelmed. No, which is was fascinating, and it took me. I think it took me like at least a week to go all over them and to think what I can contribute from my practice, my knowledge to the exhibition. And it was a totally different geography. If to be honest, I thought you will. I wasn't sure you're going to approve it, because I came with a proposal that didn't come directly from the materials, or didn't relate to these materials in a direct way, but to the topic they did. I did. I hope so. I did relate. Yes, it's true. I'm working with personal archives and collections. Some of them are collections, some of them are archives. Not only family archives, also institutions archives from Israel and from Palestine and from Turkey, Armenia, the Middle East, North Africa, and so on. And I think it's a tool for me to go and revisit what we think we know. And maybe this is a very important part of the exhibition, is to rethink this knowledge, or rethink this collective awareness that we have about the Holocaust from stories of these objects, to try to reveal it from a new way. And photography in general is obviously a great tool to explore it. And to me, it's always a surprise, like how, in a way, you're dealing with historical materials, but they seems to me, when they are being presented in a new context, they seem to be like more relevant and more futuristic even than something that is something from the past. Like seeing this, I relate to my work, but seeing Hebrew and Arabic mixed together, it almost seems like an utopic idea that someone should think about, but it's something that did exist. It disappeared because of the occupation of the Nazis. It disappeared because the establishment of Israel didn't want Arabic to promote Arabic culture, even if it was a Jewish culture. They wanted to create a new Hebrew modernist culture. And we kind of and people just forgot about it. It's like people are not aware of it. And if you compare it, well, I can go on for hours, I should stop. But if you compare it to Yiddish, for example, there was also movements against Yiddish, because it was the culture of Jews that are not from Israel, but it survived. It survived because the alphabet is like Hebrew, and it survived because Ashkenazi culture was more welcomed by Israel, seeing herself as a country that is placed in the West, which is not. But I'm mentioning here very wide subjects. I see that Hadar is nodding because
it's also like, and I'll jump in before handing it over to Hadar, but part of the very initial research that we were doing on these objects. So you'd have an object and it was looted from a vault, and then it was sent to a salt mine, and then it went into a collector's home, and then it went back into an auction. And you're looking at these objects and you're thinking, how on earth did this thing survive? Like, how on earth did this object? And I guess that's a really core concept of why we wanted to do this show, which is that you can look at these objects, whether or not it's a Franz Marc painting or whatever, pick up a Hanukkah lamp. And what you see as the viewer is you see what the artist meant for you to see. You see a cleaned up, usually well-conserved painting on canvas, or a recently restored Hanukkah lamp. You cannot see these histories. They're completely invisible. Sometimes there's a sticker on the back of the painting or something like that. It's completely invisible. So I think what we're trying to do, and why it was so important to include you guys, because you looked at things that have been displaced or that had disappeared entirely, is that you bring those invisible or lost stories right up to the surface, even if those things that are lost are languages, right? In the case that you've made, Dor.
But I will also
Hadar?
say that the damage
Yeah.
is a part. Sorry,
The damage
sorry.
is a part of it too, right?
The damage is a part of the story. I think this is very visual.
Yeah, and
That-
you took the damage and you then turned it into something that you had control over. Like, the damage you couldn't control, but the image of the damage you could. So, as an artist. So Hadar, can you, I know we're jumping all around here, but do you want to talk about the role of photographs in your work at all as a jumping off point?
It was very, I loved everything. Everything was this curious, but finally I chose, when I saw that that picture was interesting as a picture, that I can translate it to my language, which is painting, because some of the pictures looks like, okay, this is a picture, you can understand, you have all the information in as a picture, but some of these pictures, I felt that if I will painted it and peeling it out and scratching it out, I will find something else.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about your paintings. The way you make them is both additive and subtractive, that you lay down pigment and then you kind of excavate, you scratch out that history, and that's kind of a metaphor for the excavation that happens when you are delving into the subject, which has so many layers to it. I did want to ask a kind of unrelated to the themes of the show question, because I have three wonderful artists in front of me. You were all working during the pandemic. This show was pushed out by a year almost, a little under a year. And we were happy on the curatorial side because it gave us time to catch up on some loans, because obviously that process got upended by COVID. So what was it like to make work during the pandemic, and where are you now in this journey of working in these strange circumstances? Who wants to go first? Dor? Dor, okay, Hadar, you go, please.
I like this period. It's not very nice to admit, but I liked it. It was like a bubble in time that I could stay in my studio. I didn't have to go out. I didn't have to go to teach, and just to paint and think during all the day. And it's helping to the process to think and walk a lot. And actually, I love it. Now it's very difficult for me to meet people, to meet students.
You've actually been working on this project for almost 2 years, which is why we got so much work when you sent us your crates of this incredible trove.
I'm still continuing to work on the same project and some roots that went out of it, because it's very curious. I feel that I just started to understand things and maybe even didn't understand yet, and I must continue to understand. I need very long process, maybe few years more. I'm not sure.
It's definitely given us a chance to slow down, or some of us a chance. I've heard a lot of artists say they view the pandemic and it's been an opportunity for some to get back to the studio without the pressure of having to produce for art fairs and exhibitions. So Dor, how about you? What was it like to work this past year?
Well, it's not, I think that, I mean, the pandemic is not over.
No, it's not.
I was very happy, to be honest, especially because there was no traveling and working with archives. So for me, it was always a distraction to go from one place to another and just to work in the studio. It was, I did more work than I do, I think, in 5 years in 1 year. And I hope that we are all smart enough to make some some adjustment from this experience, and not just go back the minute that it will be over, to go back to what was the norm. And I think it's right for artists and curators as well.
Yeah, of course, we're talking a lot about that. The adjusting. What's the way? What have we learned from this time?
Yeah.
Lisa, you had a big move. You moved from Germany to New York, or back to New York.
I moved from Germany to New York in the middle of a pandemic, and had a baby. So it's been a very eventful, yeah, it's been a crazy year and a half. And then I feel like we're still in the middle of it, so it's hard to process of what, what the other side is going to be like and what we're going to learn. I think it kind of takes a second to have a little hindsight, especially when it's something that, at least I feel very much, at least in New York, is very much in the forefront of everyone's day-to-day life. But I can go back and talk a little bit about the archive thing if you want.
Yeah,
or are we just past that?
No, please go back.
I've always found looking, something that I find very interesting about archives is that the images and photographs in archives is that they no longer belong to anyone, really. That once an image is in circulation in some way, whether it's an archive or a newspaper or on the internet, it somehow becomes, public property. And I know that that's not true legally, but it becomes an image that enters into the private space of anyone who encounters it. And there's something about that encounter that I find very interesting and very generative in terms of thinking about the ideas. Like, what does it say that what does it mean to encounter a family photograph that's not from your family? What does it mean to encounter what is of an event that was from the 1940s that somehow you feel implicated in because of your ethnicity, but not in any real meaningful personal way. And I think that looking at images, particularly images, all images are images from the past. That's Roland Barthes said that, and it's very true that, an image is sort of dead the moment it's taken. So all photography in that way is about death, and all photography in that way is about the past. And an archive is like a repository of dead moments, in a sense. And I find that to be a very productive space to start from.
It is, but it's interesting because obviously we've been thinking and reading a lot about the archive, and one of the things I think about the space of the archive is it is a repository for the past, but it's also a message to the future. And you see that when you see the effort, and again, this goes to like these photo albums that I was describing a while ago of these Allied officials trying to assemble the objects that had been looted into some kind of order in the way that they photographed their efforts. They wanted the future to know what they did. And so it is this interesting, it's a messenger. Photographs sort of serve as these, and archives in general. They mark a historical period and they encapsulate it, but they do so for future viewers and future writers. And so I think it's kind of in a space between those two, because that's exactly what you've done, is you've used a cameraless process, actually. So that freezing of the moment is, I always associate that with more of a mechanical process, but anyway, that's splitting hairs. But you've taken that past that you were describing earlier, and you've made something new with it. And that's sort of the speaking to the future, speaking to the now, that
And I think
done so beautifully. Yeah.
something else is that I mean, this is something that I think about in lots of my work, and in this work in particular. It's like, of course, one is always looking at photographs, whether they're taken 100 years ago or taken on your iPhone 5 minutes ago. You're always looking at it in a present. So the present is always implicated in any photograph, you know, no matter when it's taken, no matter what format it's taken in. Yeah, and that's something that I find. So in that way, it's like, just going to your point about how archives are always about looking into the future, or always about like being in the present of encountering those images or those texts for whatever reason.
I think what all of you have done, which is so amazing, and it's, you know, it's amazing that you all just really approach this project with just a tremendous sense of curiosity, that you were going to do something with it, and not, I don't know. I just want to thank you for really having delved in, like, in a very personal way, I think, in different aspects of the contributions that you've made to the exhibition, and bringing forward this work during an incredibly challenging moment, when we're asking ourselves all kinds of questions about who gets to write history, and whose identities get to be brought forward, and by whom. So I guess I'm going to use this as an opportunity to thank you all for joining us today. And I look forward to our continued conversations, and we're so grateful for the enormous amount of work and the output that's now hanging on our walls that resulted from our collaboration. So have a great afternoon, and I will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darsie.
Thank you.